The Spanish conquistadors were soldiers and explorers from Spain who played a crucial role in the expansion of the Spanish Empire during the 15th and 17th centuries. Driven by a combination of ambition, religious zeal, and the pursuit of wealth, they embarked on expeditions across the Americas, destroying indigenous civilizations such as the Aztecs and Incas. Figures like Hernán Cortés and Francisco Pizarro became infamous for their military campaigns, which reshaped the political and cultural landscape of the New World. Several conquistadors explored the northern Gulf Coast to varying degrees of success, each leaving their mark and too often their scars on the region. These men were rugged and brave, but they were also ruthless. Let's not kid ourselves. These were not good people. They were, each of them, guilty of genocide to some degree. Just as their sins cannot be undone, neither can their successes. Let's meet the conquistadors on the Gulf Coast. I'm your host, Stu Donald. Let's head to the Delta. Alonso Álvarez de Pineda is largely considered the first white man to explore the upper Gulf of Gulf of America. The 1519 expedition literally reshaped the world when they became the first Europeans to see and map Mobile Bay, the Mississippi River Delta, and they even founded the city of Corpus Christi, Texas. Yet, Pineda's endeavors are mostly forgotten. Until today. The first European to lay eyes on the sugar-white sands of the American Gulf Coast was not any of the Fab Four of Spanish exploration: Vasco Núñez de Balboa, Juan Ponce de León, Hernán Cortés, or Hernando de Soto. No, the first tourist to the Gulf Coast was Alonso Álvarez de Pineda. Born in 1494 in Spain, de Pineda was a Spanish explorer and cartographer who charted the entire Gulf Coast of America, from the Florida Keys to Veracruz. He became the first European to record the mouth of the Mississippi River and explore parts of what is now Texas. Although his mission sought to find a sea route to the Orient, his efforts instead led to the detailed mapping of the coastline and ultimately debunked the existence of such a passage. When Sebastian de Ocampo navigated the northern coast of the island of Cuba in 1508, it established a few things. The expedition skimmed the coastline via the Old Bahama Channel and rounded the western tip near Cape San Antonio. His journey, spanning 8 months, countered the Gulf Stream's flow. While Europeans had already visited Cuba prior to Ocampo's expedition, his circumnavigation definitely established that it was an island encircled by water, dispelling earlier theories that it might be a peninsula. It also established the body of water on the far side of Cuba as a new frontier. In 1519, de Pineda led multiple expeditions to chart the westernmost Gulf of Mexico, now Gulf of America, from the Yucatan Peninsula to the Pánuco River. He also explored parts of Florida, which most thought was an island. Earlier explorations by Anton de Alaminos had ruled out the western area as the site of a sea passage, leaving the region between the Pánuco River and Florida to be surveyed. Francisco de Garay, governor of Santiago, organized an expedition equipping 3 ships with 270 soldiers under Álvarez de Pineda's command. Departing Santiago in early 1520, Álvarez de Pineda sailed west along the Gulf's northern coastline. Near southern Florida's western tip, his attempt to sail east was thwarted by unfavorable winds. Eventually, he anchored at Villarrica de la Veracruz shortly after Hernán Cortés had left. De Pineda would have been the first European to see the Big Bend area of Florida, or the white sands of Gulf shores. He would be the first European to see the open mouth of Mobile Bay, or the barrier island that is now a resort town called Dolphin Island. He was the first European to see both the Mobile-Tensaw Delta and the Mississippi River Delta, the 2 largest deltas in the contiguous 48 states. De Pineda's expedition would return back to Jamaica in late 1519, but without its leader, who stayed behind and presumably died in Texas. Amachil was how the Spanish recorded the name of a Native American province along the Gulf Coast that stretched from the Mobile-Tensaw Delta all the way to present-day Apalachicola Bay in Florida. In spring of 2007, Dr. Deborah Clifton, a Creek Choctaw anthropology professor at LSU Lafayette, solved the etymology of Amachil. She opined that was the Spanish way of writing Am-Ishil, which in Tabasco Maya means place of the goddess Ixchil. Ixchil was the young goddess of the moon, fertility, medicine, rain, and trade, plus was the consort of the sun god, or in some provinces, Kukulkan, the feathered serpent. Temples dedicated to Ixchil are often in the shape of a crescent, like a moon, and she is more times than not pictured holding a pet rabbit. Deep in the interior of the Mobile-Tensaw Delta, you will find the remains of a large city near Bottle Creek, which lends its name to the site. Archaeologists believe that the town, first established in the 13th century, was the political, religious, and cultural center of the north-central Gulf Coast. The city was built by the Mississippian culture, who's also responsible for Moundville in northern Alabama and Cahokia near St. Louis, Missouri. It is no stretch to say that Bottle Creek was the capital of Amachil. Now in 1519, Alonso Álvarez de Pineda first explored the Gulf Coast, stretching from Florida to Veracruz, Mexico, redefining the region known as Amachil to encompass the entire coastline. He described the area as fertile and idyllic, populated by peaceful natives with affectionate dispositions, suggesting that they could be suitable for conversion to Catholicism. Reports indicated significant physical diversity among the inhabitants, with some standing as tall as 7 feet while others were no more than 3.5 or 4 feet. It was also noted that certain natives adorned themselves with gold jewelry in their nostrils and earlobes, and the territory was said to contain a widespread presence of precious metals. Because of this, Álvarez de Pineda returned to Amachil near the mouth of Rio Panuco in late 1519 or early 1520. Francisco de Garay, Álvarez's sponsor, was desperate to establish and maintain a colony in Amachil. The colony he sought to establish there was destroyed shortly after he arrived in a Huastec uprising that cost Álvarez himself his life. Alfonso Álvarez de Pineda, the first European to explore the upper Gulf of Gulf of America, had changed the atlas forever after charting Mobile Bay and the Mississippi River Delta. So it was just another day at the office when he first entered the large saltwater estuary with a natural deep-water harbor on the day of the Feast of Corpus Christi, 1519. Because of the date, the bay was named Corpus Christi Bay, and the settlement Pineda founded there is now known as the city of Corpus Christi, Texas. That same year, Hernando Cortez first landed on the Yucatan Peninsula at what is now known as the Isle of Cozumel. Soon, he would found Villarica de la Veracruz, now Veracruz. Then, he led a land expedition from the Gulf inland some 250 miles to the site of present-day Mexico City. For these achievements, Cortez was named Marqués del Valle de Oaxaca. Oh, and also for the complete destruction of the Aztec civilization. The honor is especially notable considering that Cortez' enterprise began as an act of mutiny against his patron, the governor of Cuba, Diego Velázquez de Cuellar. Pineda, at the behest of his patron, Francisco de Garay, governor of the colony of Santiago, now Jamaica, embarked on a second expedition to the Gulf region. Pineda's fleet would eventually drop anchor off of Veracruz, narrowly missing Hernan Cortez. The latter, having learned of the former's arrival at the settlement he had just founded, abandoned his conquest and returned to Veracruz. Álvarez de Pineda wished to establish a boundary between the lands he was claiming for Garay and those that Cortez had already claimed. However, Cortez was in no mood to bargain. Pineda was armed with orders from Garay to take over the settlement. Cortez refused the orders, brandishing a title establishing Veracruz as his estate. Wanting to avoid bloodshed between the two countrymen, whose loyalty was pledged to the same flag, Pineda decided to take his fleet and sail north along the Gulf Coast in order to establish his own settlement. Now, Cortez' loyalty was not to the Spanish Empire, but to his own hubris. He didn't want any rival to his power, not even a fellow countryman. Pineda's fleet had hardly gotten under sail when Cortez' men attacked. Most of Pineda's men were captured, but the Conquistador and a number of his faithful lieutenants managed to escape by water and 8 days later found refuge at the mouth of a new river we now call the Rio Grande. He found that within a 50-mile radius of where they landed, there were roughly 40 different native tribes. On Pineda's third expedition to the region, he sought to colonize the Panuco River near present-day Tampico, Mexico. Álvarez de Pineda was subsequently killed in a battle with the native Uztec people. Cortez, for his part, would remain in New Spain until 1541, before returning to Europe, where he would pass 6 years later. Love them or hate them, the Spanish conquistadors were an assortment of some of the most tenacious and fearless men of their time. Their names resonate through history. De Soto, Cortez, Ponce de Leon, de Vaca, men who braved the unknown and survived disease, all while taming 2 continents. Then there was Pánfilo de Narváez, the Charlie Brown of conquistadors. Though Alonso Álvarez de Pineda is considered by most modern scholars to be the first European to ever see Mobile Bay, there are some who believe the credit actually belongs to Narváez. Narváez was born in Castile, Spain, with at least 3 different villages claiming to be his birthplace. Even though the exact place he was born may elude us, historians firmly agree that he was born in 1470 or 1478. He was a relative of Diego Velázquez de Color, the first Spanish governor of Cuba. So yeah, he was a Nepo baby. Roughly 25 years the senior of his contemporaries, Narváez was a key figure in the conquest of Jamaica and Cuba in the early 1500s. He became infamous for his merciless actions. According to Bartolomé de las Casas, a chaplain during the Cuban campaign who documented many harrowing accounts, Narváez was responsible for the massacre of Caona, where his troops slaughtered a village full of natives who were friendly enough to greet the newcomers with food. His first command was a hybrid expedition and bounty hunt, as Narváez was charged with apprehending the rogue explorer Hernán Cortés, who had defied Cuellar's orders by exploring the interior of Mexico and eviscerating the Aztec Empire's kind of a side hustle. This mission took place in 1519, the same time that Pineda was discovering Alabama. No else so much for that theory. The armies of Cortés and Narváez ultimately met at Cempoala, near present-day Veracruz. It ended with Cortés thoroughly whipping Narváez, taking half of his men and then sending him back to Cuba with his tail between his legs. Narváez's second expedition set sail in April of 1527 with 5 ships and about 600 soldiers and adventurers. 12 months later, when they finally landed near what is today Tampa, Florida, half his men deserted. Dude should have gone back home and gone to bed. Narváez and his remaining troops stumbled inland, launching assaults on every tribe they encountered, almost always losing. Low on rations, the crew continued to move north along the west coast of Florida. It was during this part of the campaign that he is thought to have explored what is now Alabama. They would have lost another 100 men to disease and warfare. Ultimately, he decided to throw in the towel and return to Cuba, but he had lost contact with his ship, so the surviving soldiers built 4 rafts and headed for open water like that was a good idea or something. In the end, only 4 men would survive the expedition. Ultimately, Narváez's second expedition was a comedy of errors, or I guess since several hundred people died, it would make it more of a dark comedy of errors. Recently on my shorts feed, I did a series about Chief Tuscaloosa and Hernando de Soto. De Soto's expedition was the first recorded exploration of the interior of what we now call the Deep South. The results of that encounter set the stage for a 400-year event that would see the native population go from 18 million people in 1500 to roughly 300,000 in 1900. According to NativeAmericans.org, Tuscaloosa was a cacique, or paramount chief, of the Tuscaloosa, a Mississippian chiefdom located in what we today know as Alabama. His birth year is unknown, but he died in 1540. The name Tuscaloosa means black warrior in the Western Muskegon language. His province included a series of villages, of which most were located along the rivers Coosa and Alabama. Each village had its own chief who was a vassal to Tuscaloosa. According to contemporary sources, Tuscaloosa was very tall, muscular, and lean. Some chroniclers even claimed that he was 1.5 feet taller than the Spaniard. The city of Tuscaloosa in Alabama is named for him. Some reports set Tuscaloosa's height at over 7 feet. He was said to be powerfully built, yet lean and agile. With jet black hair and an intelligent, stately visage, there is little wonder that he was the most revered chief of the region. But from the day he was born, he was on a collision course with history. In May of 1539, 9 Spanish galleons commanded by Hernando de Soto sailed into Tampa Bay to begin the first expedition of what is now the Deep South. According to Britannica.com, de Soto was a Spanish explorer and conquistador who earned his stripes in the conquest of Central America and Peru. But it is the expedition of Florida for which he is best remembered. De Soto spent his youth in the family manor house at Juárez de los Caballeros. His parents intended him to be a lawyer, but in 1514, while still in his teens, he told his father of his desire to go to sea. The Florida expedition spent that first winter at the small native village of Appalachia. From there they moved northward through Georgia, then westward through the Carolinas and Tennessee, led by native guides whom they abducted along the way. Near Lookout Mountain, De Soto turned southward into Alabama and headed towards Mobile Bay, where they expected to rendezvous with their ships. Destiny had different plans. After making their way by horse from Florida north into Tennessee, De Soto's expedition turned southeast into the land of the Alabama. Many were the stories of the great cacique Tuscaloosa, and De Soto was determined to meet the man. On October 9th, they crossed the Tallapoosa River and made camp very close to Tuscaloosa's village, Attahachie. De Soto dispatched a messenger requesting a meeting. Tuscaloosa responded that the expedition could approach whenever De Soto wanted to. The following day, the expedition entered the village, and De Soto was brought to see the great chief. Attahachie was a large fortified community with a grand plaza. Tuscaloosa, adorned in the dress of a man of his stature, was seated on high cushions under a portico on top of an earthen mound. After the hospitality of a feast and dancing concluded, De Soto demanded that they were provided with bearers and women. Tuscaloosa replied that he was used to being served, not to serve it. Suddenly, the invaders sprang to action, taking the chief hostage. Relenting to spare his people, Tuscaloosa agreed to accommodate De Soto's demands, but to do so, they must travel to the great village of Mauvila. It was a trap. In autumn of 1540, an expeditionary force of 600 or so Spaniards led by Hernando de Soto and involuntarily accompanied by Chief Tuscaloosa approached the fortified village of Mauvila. Hidden within were nearly 3,000 warriors awaiting the command to attack the invaders. A skirmish between a Spanish officer and an indigenous man erupted into chaos. At first, the natives overwhelmed the Europeans, but soon the Spanish rallied, and bolstered by their advanced technology, gunpowder and armor, left most of the inhabitants of Mauvila dead, and their town burned to the ground, its location lost to history. But its legacy lives on through the river, delta, bay, and city that reflect its name, Mobile. Native tribes are represented by many of the rivers in the Mobile-Tensaw Delta. The delta is formed by the Alabama River, which is named after the Alabama or Alabamu, a southeastern people of the Muskogee Creek Confederacy. Their homelands were on the upper Alabama River. It joins with the Tombigbee River, which is a Choctaw word meaning box maker or coffin maker, to form the Mobile River. The Mobile River is named for the Mobile tribe, which may have been descendants of the people who lived in the fortified town of Mauvila. Additionally, the delta is made up of the Tensaw River, which gets its name from the historic indigenous Tensaw people who were more closely related to the Natchez people. Both are considered descendants of the Plaquemine culture. And finally, the Appalachie River is named after the Appalachee, a woodlands tribe who lived mostly in the Florida Panhandle, but also hunted and fished in the delta. Many tribes once called the Mobile-Tensaw Delta home. The Alabama were a member of the Muskogee Creek Confederacy. The tribe now resides mostly on reservations in Oklahoma and Texas. The Appalachee hunted and fished throughout the Delta. The remaining 300 Appalachee descendants now live in Louisiana. Once revered as the Spartans of the lower Mississippi Valley, the Chickasaw are now headquartered in Oklahoma. Arguably the most adept farmers, the Choctaw even processed extra crops for sale and trade. Although many Creek followed the Trail of Tears to Oklahoma, roughly 2,500 Creek still live on the Delta at the Porch Reservation near Atmore. The Mobilians occupied the area that would become Alabama's first city, Mobile. The Tensaw were driven out of their home in the Delta by the Chickasaw and relocated to Louisiana. It is important to note that the Apache, led by Geronimo, lived in exile on the Delta for 7 years before being forced onto an Oklahoma reservation. Tristán de Luna y Arellano played a significant role in the history of Mobile, Alabama, and the Mobile-Tensaw Delta. Born to nobility in Barboria, Spain in 1510, Luna moved to New Spain, modern-day Mexico. During his years there, Luna served with Francisco Vázquez de Coronado on his expedition to the 7 cities of Cibola, where he fought in the indigenous rebellion of Oaxaca. Luna was chosen by Luis de Vasco, Viceroy of New Spain, to establish a settlement on the Gulf Coast. De Luna's fleet departed from San Juan de Ulna near present-day Vera in mid-July of 1559. However, adverse weather would delay the passage. Weather, especially hurricanes, would be a recurring theme during the expedition. In late July or early August, he sailed into Filipina Bay, now Mobile Bay, with a fleet of 11 ships, over 500 soldiers, and around 1,000 settlers, including men, women, and servants. Today, there is a historical marker dedicated to De Luna at the USS Alabama Battleship Memorial Park in Mobile. The stay was only temporary, and soon he resumed the voyage towards their final planned destination of Pensacola Bay, then called Ochos Bay. On October 14, 1559, they arrived at what is now Pensacola Bay and dropped anchor. Work began to establish the first Spanish colony in the region. It would not be easy. In addition to hurricanes, challenges such as famine and various misfortunes would ultimately lead to the failure of the colonization effort. A month or so after founding the settlement called Santa Maria de Ochos, yet another hurricane hit the expedition, destroying or grounding the fleet and leaving De Luna's men without ships and very little supplies. The stranded explorers made their way inland up the Alabama River to the known village of Nanapacana, which they found deserted. Naming the town Santa Cruz de Nanacapana, they encamped until the resupply arrived. Lack of food at Nanacapana and the quick exhaustion of their supply forced De Luna to send some of his men up the Alabama and Coosa rivers to the Coosa chiefdom located near what is now the Little River Canyon National Preserve on top of Lookout Mountain. Lookout Mountain occupies parts of 3 modern states, Alabama, Georgia, and Tennessee. Little River Canyon is the deepest canyon east of the Mississippi River, and De Luna's expedition marks the first Europeans on record to see it, though it is believed that De Soto's expeditions 20 years prior also visited the site. Though Santa Maria de Ochos was abandoned in 1561, the enterprise marked an important attempt at European settlement along the Gulf Coast. To learn more about America's Amazon, the Mobile-Tensaw Delta, be sure to subscribe to Delta Safari.